Hi, I'm Gregg LeFevre, and this is the Compulsive Storyteller, a series of short personal stories where we explore the idea that truth can be stranger than fiction. This week's story is entitled Harlem Sojourn. Harlem Sojourn. I had no idea what I was getting into when I went to a public meeting in an office building on 125th Street in Harlem. The federal government's Department of Housing and Urban Development, better known as HUD, was holding a meeting to unveil a new program they were introducing that promised those who applied that they might win an opportunity to purchase a whole building in Harlem for almost no money, for a song, as the saying goes. Given this possibility, the room was packed with all types of people, black, brown, Asian, and Caucasian, including me, a white guy who lived downtown in my sculpture studio in Soho. The HUD spokesperson passed around a stack of applications to the attendees, who were so anxious to apply for the program it was like a feeding frenzy. Or maybe I should say a gold rush, that might be more appropriate. Several applications were ripped in half by two different competing attendees who didn't want to be left out. "Just relax, everyone," said the HUD representative on his mic. "It's encouraging to see that so many of you are interested in the program, but everybody will get an application." I had brought along a clipboard and a pen. Once I filled out my application, the guy next to me wanted to borrow my clipboard and pen, then the woman next to him. It didn't take long before it disappeared into the voracious crowd, never to be seen again. Then the spokesperson came back on the mic and began to explain the program. There are many abandoned buildings in and around Harlem. Some are empty because the owners failed to pay their New York City property taxes, so the city repossessed them, but then left them to rot in place. Others were involved in litigation over the property's ownership, and still others had burned and were uninhabitable. HUD will bundle these properties together in groups of 20 to 40 buildings, and then building developers and contractors will be invited to bid on each bundle, following strict redevelopment guidelines. The winning contractor then reconstructs the 20 to 40 properties, and when they are finished, these newly renovated properties are offered to New York City residents who have applied for the program. They too will be chosen in another lottery. I had done my research before the meeting, and their guidelines said that typically 1,000 people apply for a property in the developer's bundle of 20 to 40 buildings. If you do the math, then someone has a 1 in 25 to a 1 in 50 chance of winning the lottery. Not terrible odds, so I decided to hand in my application. Then began the question and answer period, where attendees' different levels of intelligence and language abilities were on full display. I found it frustrating to listen to, so I slowly windowed my way out of the shoulder-to-shoulder crowd and caught the A train downtown. By the time I'd received my notification letter about a month later, I had pretty much forgotten about the whole program. Opening the letter, I happily read that I was selected in the lottery, and attached was a list of 20 different addresses in Harlem where buildings were available. I decided that I would take a folding chair, a notebook, and a flashlight and sit in front of each residence, both at noon and at midnight. I was definitely a little freaked out sitting in front of some of the addresses at midnight. Amazingly though, I didn't have trouble with any of the guys hanging out nearby. I think that sitting in a folding chair in the middle of the night was so over the top, everyone just left me alone. Some of the properties I eliminated because of noise, both heavy city traffic and overhead train lines. Others were charred and burned, so I eliminated them as well. And a few just felt too barren and forlorn. One of the properties I fell in love with was 111 West 128th Street. It was half a block away from Lenox Avenue on a quiet block directly across from a lovely park with lots of mature trees, a couple of tennis courts, and a mini playground. Because of the park, the front of the building received sunlight all day long. The building itself was interesting. It was 4 stories tall and had Art Deco cast iron fire escapes between all the floors on the front facade. It was also constructed in a way unlike any other building in Manhattan. The brick face of the building had a jog in it like one half of a bay window. All the building facades east of it lined up in a row. Then there was a jog in the building halfway across it, and then all the buildings to the west of it were aligned closer to the curb. I didn't realize it at the time, but the jog caught the breeze coming along 128th Street from the east, so there was always a breeze blowing through every floor of the building. The downside of the building was breathtakingly obvious. Because it had sat empty for 30 years and no repairs were ever done to the roof, all the floors had rotted from leaking water and eventually collapsed one onto another into the basement, leaving only a hollow brick tube standing. As time went by, trees took root in the basement mulch and eventually grew to a height taller than the building. The builder, who had my building as part of his bundle of properties, started out on mine by removing all the trees. Then he shored up the interior brick walls and added heavy wood beams and wooden flooring to all the floors and the roof. At this point, I started to collaborate with the builder, paying him $10,000 to dig the basement deep enough so that I would have a full 8-foot deep basement. One day as I walked from my train on 125th Street, heading up to my building, a Pimpmobile was about to pull into a parking space. Pimp's cars were all very similar, a Cadillac convertible with a Rolls-Royce grille, usually gold in color, set into the middle of the existing grille. Pimps, by and large, wore long coats, nicely tailored brightly colored suits, and sported a broad-brimmed felt hat, sometimes with featheration, sometimes not. The pimp in the car I was passing yelled out to me, "Yo, give me a quarter for the meter." He had 2 much younger men in the back seat, both wearing black do-rags and black leisure suits. I responded, "Let me see if I got this straight. You're driving a new Cadillac and you want me to give you a quarter." "That's right, honky." His passengers were starting to enjoy the exchange, but he was not. At this point, I'd had enough, so I replied, "Fuck you, man." He then attempted to get out of the car, but he was overweight, so it took some time. He then came toward me. I am thin and what you might call light on my feet, so I easily danced around him. "Come on, fatso." Now his passengers were really laughing at him, and he was as enraged as any bull in a bull ring. I was getting worried, though, because passers-by were beginning to slow down to watch the action. Many of them were smiling as well. This was a very rare sight in the center of Harlem. My final gesture was to throw him a quarter. Then I waltzed off across 125th Street. Sometimes I have to question my judgment. This was one of those times. But if I'm insulted, I don't seem to have a choice but to respond in kind. At the beginning of my Harlem sojourn, I entered my street as the only white resident for blocks around. A number of my neighbors welcomed me with a smile and a handshake. I think they realized that if a white person was in residence, maybe city services like street cleaning and trash collection would improve, as well as police response times. On a trip up Lenox Avenue one day, I came upon a stage set up by the Democratic Party with flags and bunting. Bill Clinton was about to speak. I had followed the recent press that he had received when members of an exclusive Upper East Side co-op had rejected his application to join. After an introduction and applause from the sizable, mostly African-American crowd, he started his remarks. When I decided to move here from Washington, D.C., Harlem was the very first place I thought of moving to. The applause was deafening. This, of course, was a straight-out lie, but no one seemed to know. Maybe the Amsterdam News hadn't covered his problems on the Upper East Side. About this time, I realized that I needed to keep an eye on my building contractor's subcontractors because they were working mostly unsupervised. A Jamaican crew had been tasked with sealing up all the holes in the brick walls with concrete to prevent rats from entering from adjoining buildings. Then they were put to work covering the brick walls with studs and sheetrock. Because they were making incredibly slow progress, I made a surprise visit one day to the site. When I arrived, there was a very strong smell of marijuana in the space, and they were all fast asleep. I woke them up and told them that they were all fired. They were angry and demanded to be paid off immediately in cash, which I refused to do, telling them that legally I had 2 weeks to pay them for the work done, and had them each give me their addresses, some on small pieces of paper. Soon thereafter, I mailed each of them their check. A week later, I listened to the following message on my answering machine. "Hey man, you never send me my check, and I'm going to come up to your studio, and if you don't pay me, I'm going to kill you." I kept the answering machine taped because threatening someone's life is a felony. When he showed up at my studio, I didn't let him in, and we conducted our business outside on the street with one of my studio assistants looking on as backup. I handed him his envelope, which had been returned to sender because it had the wrong address on it. He shrugged his shoulders and responded, "Geez." Then I asked him, "Give me one good reason why I shouldn't call the police on you for threatening my life. You'll either end up in prison or back in Jamaica." He just grinned sheepishly and muttered under his breath, "Sorry, man." As the developer's responsibilities for my building were coming to an end, I started to work on many fronts simultaneously, upgrading the building. My backyard was surrounded by an 8-foot-tall natural wood picket fence. Within it was a large crop of American bamboo, also called ironweed, covering the entire backyard to a height higher than the fence. I went at it with Roundup spray weed killer. It did kill off each stalk of the bamboo, but then lots of new sprouts would pop up around it, not unlike the brooms from Disney's Sorcerer's Apprentice. The bamboo was a problem I never solved throughout my tenure on 128th. I was also concerned about break-ins, so I designed and installed some lovely Art Deco cast iron window grates for the first floor windows. They were meant to complement the cast iron Art Deco fire escapes out front. We never had a break-in, and they seemed to work, but one winter morning after a fresh snowfall, there were tracks starting where someone had jumped the fence, and they walked from window to window, presumably trying to open each one, then exited the yard on the opposite side. Seeing them really gave me the creeps. My next-door neighbor to the west was a very friendly and entertaining middle-aged African-American guy. As our friendship developed, he regaled me with stories about the neighborhood. Malcolm X, for example, had once addressed a big crowd in front of my building, and John Coltrane had briefly lived down the block. At one point, he showed me a nasty infected cut he had on his ankle. I advised him to see a doctor immediately, which he stubbornly refused to do. Then I heard he'd been taken to the hospital, so I asked his wife which hospital. When I arrived to his hospital room, he was in great spirits, which I was glad to see. But then he told me that because he had developed gangrene in his ankle, they had to amputate his right leg just below the knee. He decided he wanted to have a peg leg instead of a prosthesis, and proudly recited to me pegs he wanted to have fashioned for his leg. 1 ebony, 1 ivory, 1 mahogany, 1 silver, and 1 gold. I was so impressed that someone could be in such high spirits and find joy in making the best of a truly awful situation. Many Harlemites seem to possess this same ability. My building was almost completed, so now I could start to look for renters. I decided to save money by not using a realtor and find my own tenants. I pretty much handled all other aspects of the building myself. Rentals, repairs, plumbing, electric, a jack of all trades. The very first time I showed one of my units, a nice young Canadian couple who both worked on Wall Street at Ziff Brothers wanted to sign a lease. I was never sure whether they wanted to be hip and live in Harlem, or just save money from what they would have been paying downtown. While they were very friendly, they were also demanding. For example, they wanted the doors on one of their closets reversed for easier access and a larger medicine cabinet installed in the bathroom. Since I was a new landlord and eager to please, I agreed to both of their requests. Then their check for the first month's rent and security deposit bounced. I didn't know what I was doing because I had already gone ahead and signed the lease with them before the check cleared. Their excuse was that there was a problem with their accounts at their bank in Toronto. At first I believed them, but as the weeks passed, my trust waned. After 2 months and an array of different stories about why the money wasn't forthcoming, I decided I had to take action. I contacted the law firm of Green & Green, a couple of nasty, tough real estate attorneys who represented landlords exclusively. Stephen Green said to me, "Okay, we'll have them served eviction papers tomorrow morning. We'll drag their asses out of there within a month or two, 3 months tops." One of the things that I promised myself when I purchased 111 West 128th Street was that I wouldn't become a hard-ass, inhumane New York City landlord. Dealing with these lawyers made me wonder if I wasn't rapidly moving in that direction. If it might take 3 months to get them out, I also made some moves of my own, namely taking them to small claims court. The process was fast. They would receive a summons to appear within a few weeks, not a few months. The upper limit back then for a small claims action was $3,000, and they owed me far more than that. So I brought 4 different actions against them, one for each month's rent they owed me. They would receive a notification of the action in the mail, but just to make sure they were aware of the situation, I scotch-taped a copy to the front door of their apartment and photographed it. Both the husband and wife showed up in court. The husband, wearing a stylish Armani suit, claimed poverty to the judge. I pointed this out to His Honor. When I prevailed in my small claims action, the judge ordered them to write, sign, post-date, and give me a series of checks that would cover all their back rent. When we were all done, outside the judge's chambers, the husband tried to give me a no hard feelings hug, which I angrily fended off. So ended my relationship with my first tenants. In the meantime, I had one more scofflaw tenant, a location scout for The Sopranos, who was also a crackhead. Again, I prevailed in small claims court. By now I'd learned an important lesson. Research, research, research. All prospective tenants. I developed a comprehensive questionnaire and then followed up on every question, calling their previous landlords and employment references. Did a credit check and a criminal background check as well. Also, while I researched expeditiously, I took my time. By following all my rules, I never had another problematic tenant in all the years that I owned my building. I also discovered that the best bets were professional African American women who've been out of school for a few years. They made perfect tenants. My building was now occupied with great tenants, all the final construction upgrades were complete, and I could relax. Or so I thought. The city of New York had other ideas. It was announced that within a year, construction would begin on an affordable housing project right across from my building, which would result in the destruction of the park that was there. No more afternoon sunlight, no more tall elm and pine trees, which would change with the seasons. No more sounds of kids playing in the playground. All would be gone. It occurred to me that this situation had all the elements that could coalesce into a successful campaign to save the park. Destroying a park with lots of mature trees should be an environmental issue that would surely find support among the many national environmental groups headquartered in New York. Bette Midler had just led a movement to save over 24 vest pocket parks all around the city, which culminated in a big concert in Central Park in 1995. Almost all of these parks are still thriving today. Also, as stakeholders, we were never invited to the meetings at City Hall where the project was originally approved, which violated the city's urban development rules. I did a little investigating and it turned out there were some political shenanigans as well. A waiting list of people who wanted to rent apartments in the new apartment building had formed, and the list was filled with the relatives of local and city politicians. They didn't even hide their identities. Reading the last names in the list was a veritable who's who of local politicians and city administrators. I figured that with all these things in our favor, we had a good shot at saving the park. I reserved a room in a community center on the next block and worked hard to get everyone to come to the first Save Our Park meeting. A modest number of all types of people attended: African Americans, Africans, Caribbean Islanders, and Hispanic people from all over Central and South America. I was the only Caucasian attending. I also got a reporter from the New York Times to come, which I thought was a real coup. But things did not start off well. Right off the bat, one of the attendees asked, "So how come you're in charge?" I responded, "I am not in charge. I'm just getting the ball rolling, and now I hope we can choose someone else to take over." That's when the real trouble started. Sadly, the members of different groups didn't get along, and in the absence of a leader, things quickly degenerated into a shouting match. Everyone was talking over everyone else, and the combative exchanges were laced with a good deal of raw profanity. Some people left in a huff, while others just raised their voices higher. It was a total shit show. The Times reporter pulled me aside and asked, "Would you rather I describe what I witnessed here tonight, or just not write anything at all?" I chose the latter, thanked him for his time, and left the meeting myself. After my failure surrounding saving the park, I felt so defeated I decided to sell my building. I was tired of being a landlord because even in the best of times, there were always problems. My Harlem sojourn was difficult, right down to the closing for the sale of my property. After showing the building to a number of potential buyers, the one that came closest to my asking price was an opera singer from a wealthy real estate family in Canada. At the closing in my bank's offices, she had committed to deliver a certified check for the agreed-upon selling price. My attorney noticed a couple of typos on the check, including the spelling of my name, so we had to adjourn until the next day, when she would return with everything in order. Ever the walking disaster, she was 45 minutes late for that meeting. Years after my building was sold, I am still receiving trash tickets to the tune of $175 each, mailed to my studio from the Department of Sanitation for violations incurred now at 111 West 128th Street. I am so happy that my Harlem sojourn is finally over. Copyright 2025 by Gregg LeFevre. All rights reserved. If you enjoyed this week's episode, let us know. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Compulsive Storyteller, and we'd love to hear from you. This podcast is independently produced, so we really appreciate all your help and support. Share the show with your friends, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave a review. You can also check out our website, thecompulsivestoryteller.com, for more information. Thanks for listening, and if you didn't like this one, the next one will be another story. The Compulsive Storyteller is now co-produced by Gregg LeFevre and Fadia Montserrat, who's also arranged the music and created the special effects. Emily Ramon does design, research, editing, and marketing. Peter Kokoma has made our theme music and for many seasons co-produced the show with me. All characters and events portrayed in this podcast are based on my truth, with some names and facts changed for privacy. The conversations and dialogues are based on my best memory, but are not word-for-word recreations.